SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
Welcome back to our remote studio here at the Nasrec Expo Center, where we are at the final moments of the opening or closing session, I should say, the closed plenary that is still ongoing, discussions around critical minerals, decent work, artificial intelligence, and then we expect to hear from President Cyril Ramaphosa at around 1 o'clock Central African time, when he will make his closing statement, concluding the very historic first South African G20 Leaders Summit. And as you've been watching the two of us, I am alongside my colleague Thulasizwe Simelane.
I think what we're seeing, the visuals were showing are from inside in the plenary. And as we were saying earlier on, Shawan, that the arrangement at this summit is that we are allowed to keep a camera on, rolling, and just getting the visuals, but without the audio, importantly, without the audio. So this for me, and I was saying earlier on, makes for, significant change from other international summits and conferences I've covered, where a closed session means exactly that. And I think the person speaking there is from the New Development Bank, if my eyes are not failing me. That's the bank that people will say is the BRICS Bank. And there is that image of the Protea that continues to hang about and provides a backdrop and background for these conversations. A constant reminder that all of this is happening within South Africa. Resilience, renewal, rejuvenation, those themes you associate with the Protea continue to be important as well, in as far as some of the themes being discussed. As you say, a fair and just future for all, critical minerals, decent work, and artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. Dilma Rousseff, the former Brazilian president, of course.
I thought it was her.
I mean, you were close. You were close. you just didn't take the risk of saying it on air. Leave that to me. I'll put me on the spot. Dilma Rousseff, the president of the New Development Bank, and of course the former president of Brazil, and she was also the chief of staff, if you want some information, to the incumbent president of Brazil, who was there for a term, left for a term, and then came back.
And in typical Brazilian fashion,
actually he left before Jair Bolsonaro. Actually, my bad.
And in typical Brazilian fashion, after you leave office, there's going to be some legal trouble for you, the threat of going to prison. She also at some point faced all of those. Jair Bolsonaro being taken into custody yesterday. So when we talk about President Lula da Silva, he wears it stoically. We saw him earlier on. He's stoic. You wouldn't say that this is a man who's got a lot of things going on in his country at the moment.
I mean, he's the BRICS president at the moment. He's the COP president at the moment. He's the former G20 president, but he's still within the Troika, so very, very active. And then he's also got to be the president of Brazil.
Yeah, and dealing with Jair Bolsonaro being taken to prison in the context of what Donald Trump has been saying and trying to insert himself, as the expression you used, into that particular conversation. But also a change of guard. South Africa taking over the chairperson at the chair of IBSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. So lots of moving parts at a diplomatic level.
And lots of tariffs in that room, 30%, 50%, 50%. It's, lots of, hopefully not some legal troubles in that regard. Let's talk a little bit about the outcome document, the Leaders' Declaration, and let's bring in Brooks Spector, international relations expert and associate editor at Daily Maverick. Thank you for your patience, Brooks. It's good to see you.
No problem. Happy to be here.
So, give us your assessment. The South African government delegation has a spring in its step. Is that justified or not?
Well, I mean, it was an interesting moment right at the beginning of the opening plenary. South African president introduced the event and set out the nature of the agenda and the reason, why are we here moment and what does it mean. And then he proceeded to effectively read the closing statement ahead of time. Yeah. And that was not supposed to be, presumably, broadcast.
If you buy that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, my assumption was that it had been sufficiently articulated and worked out ahead of time between the various experts groups and the so-called Sherpas that there was very little left to argue about, little, not none, but little, that this was done deliberately, virtually, to say to people, you see, we have already reached unanimity, and here it is. The thing about that statement, which I was not expecting, I assumed that because there were going to be differences of views and opinions, it would be like many of these and many gatherings like this, that the statement becomes rather general, rather anodyne, not detailed, not specifics. And yet this one is. It's long. It goes deeply into things about trade and minerals and all the other issues that are in it. Depending on how it's formatted for you, it's more than 20-some pages long, which is unusual, if not unique, for something like this. And at the end of it, we are told that the way it was described, nations in attendance have agreed to this. The crucial word left out, of course, was all, which let us know that at least one country, in this case Argentina, had some reservations and some qualms about it. And Argentina was generally seen by many people as something of a stalking horse on behalf of the man who was not there and who was not represented.
Right. And Zane Dangle, the Sherpa and the Director General in International Relations, the Department of International Relations, made the point that this is an informal grouping, and that's why they were able to say that, you know, the members in the room or that were gathered here rather than everybody, and in their argument, that's what consensus given the informal. So there's no rule that says you can't do it, and therefore they did it.
Yeah, except that as a general principle,
right,
up until yesterday,
yes,
it has been the understanding that the statement has everybody in the room in support. We've all signed off and we're good to go.
Yes.
This time around, we have effectively created a new working arrangement that consensus means an overwhelming majority, but there will be some people who say, wait a minute. Yeah. And in this case, that's what happened. What also struck me as interesting, and I'm still digesting just how it played out, Donald Trump or a serious representative of the United States, either the president or the vice president or perhaps Secretary of State, was not there, and yet the presence of the American administration was hovering above the event but not participating in it. And it was as if the people in the room were saying, okay, we understand you're not here, we understand that you're not saying anything about it precisely, but we recognize that you're there and you have interests. We'll get to you later.
Yeah. But why though, Brooks, in terms of the informality of it all and the meaning of consensus? Because, you know, I suppose there's now a range of what consensus can mean. It can mean sufficient consensus, which is the common word, at least in the South African political context, or overwhelming consensus, or unanimous consensus. Well, it seems to me we are now the president used overwhelming consensus, but I have a feeling that we're now in the realm of, due to the informality of it all, that sufficient consensus will do. Or am I reading too much into it?
Well, I'm not sure you are. I think there was a very careful parsing of the adjectives attached to the word consensus. But remember, too, that the statement that comes out at the end, or in this case, that came out at the beginning,
yes,
it doesn't have the force of law. There's no executive secretariat. There's no administrative head. There's no judiciary. Certainly there's no military associated with the G20, which means that any country that is a member of the gathering can say we agree with it. They go home and they begin to consider how much and if and in what way they will comport themselves to be in agreement with the specifics, because there will always be disagreements about what a particular thing, just take critical minerals, all right? There is an argument about if a country is digging up valuable rocks and exporting them to another country where they are further processed into raw material, which is then processed into refined material, which then goes into an actual finished product. The argument seems to be that more of that beneficiation must happen in the country of initial origin, as is only fair and equitable. Equitable is a word that seems to get thrown around a lot. But There's no specific process by which this can be adjudicated. In fact, there's no percentage listed, and there's no method for measuring whether it was sufficiently equitable.
I mean, that's true for all multilateral resolutions at the United Nations, right? The only binding resolutions are UN Security Council resolutions, and those too are ignored. So, and there's no mechanism unless there's agreement between the P5 of the big powers are not fighting to hold those, those countries that defy those resolutions
Yes and
accountable.
no, because the UN does, after all, have an international court mechanism,
Which also rules and is ignored.
and is and isn't. Most of the resolutions that come out of the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court are not ignored, but they are sort of chivied at the edges, because most of them are not about egregious behavior by a country against the citizens of another, as much as they are disputes between nations over the behavior of one country versus another. Take the International Court ruling that Vladimir Putin has an arrest warrant. Where is Vladimir Putin right this minute? He's not here because this country would be obligated to enforce that. He chose not to come. So there is some measure of enforcement built into the decisions, even if it is not always true, even if it is not consistent, and even if it is not obligatory and mandatory in the eyes of the country, the receiving country.
I would argue that the ICC is a little bit different from the ICJ because South Africa has domesticated the Rome Statute, so it does, in that sense, have a legal obligation.
Which is why
Vladimir Putin can't come here.
But most of the international court rulings are things that are fairly obscure. Not all, but most of them are like border arguments about
the ICJ.
Yeah,
the International Court of Justice,
Justice.
So the ICJ is the judicial organ of the United Nations, and it settles disputes between countries.
And
the ICC is a criminal procedure that charges individuals of crimes, humanity, and so.
Yeah, the Rome Statute set up a very different category of how international court structure should behave. Now, we've moved away a little bit from your discussion about.
But it's interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it does matter, because it did obviously affect the way Vladimir Putin did not make his appearance. And in fact, if we're talking about that, nor did his deputy president, nor did his foreign minister. It was a lower level.
Probably a deputy foreign minister?
No, it was somebody out of the. It was a subdirector of the cabinet secretariat, whose Ovachin, whose first name I don't remember. But the question then is, he is sufficiently removed from any of the impacts of the criminal court ruling, he could not be held liable for them, right? Now, you compare that to the United States, they chose to have nobody attend. They chose to, at the end of the discussion, to argue that perhaps an observer could attend and receive the handoff of the ceremonial mace or gavel or papers or whatever constitutes the actual formal transfer. South Africans were less than pleased with that idea. And one of the things that happened was the charge that was bandied about that it was a junior official, a junior embassy staffer. Well, the charge d'affaires ad interim is not a junior official. He's effectively the ambassador until
in the absence of the ambassador.
Exactly so. And he's a serious senior foreign service officer, been a foreign service officer for decades, and it was perfectly reasonable for him to be the representative if you were trying to demonstrate the top leadership of the country was not coming. Now, in the end, of course, this handover of whatever these things are isn't going to take place today. It's going to take place sometime in the coming week,
coming days,
in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation's office in Pretoria, and it'll be fairly quiet. And that tells me that the Donald Trump gambit to exercise more control over the content did not succeed.
Speaking of that then, Brooks, and perhaps as a parting shot from my side, what's your assessment of President Cyril Ramaphosa's navigation of all of those issues? And you've touched on a lot of them. The absence of Vladimir Putin here follows his absence from the BRICS summit a couple of years, I think 2 years ago, and even then the question was being asked, what does it mean? Is it a snub, or is it an understanding between leaders who respect one another, one saying to the other, don't put me in an awkward position, and the other saying, of course I get you, I understand fully. But tying into that, the adoption of the declaration right at the start, which lots of people were cheering for.
Before the start, actually.
Before the start. in the wake of the United States, that was even said to have gone to some lengths of trying to reach out to other countries to say, try and ensure that there's no declaration coming out of that. I imagine that there must have been a lot of, not imagine, I keep saying imagine, but not imagine. The Minister of International Relations tells us that there was a lot of diplomatic maneuvering that was happening as the leaders were beginning to arrive. So take all of that, wrap it up for me. Do the people who are saying this was Cyril Ramaphosa's crowning moment as a statesman on the global stage, do they have that point right?
I used to teach international relations for a few years at Wits University, and I had to give marks to students. And if I was asked to give Cyril Ramaphosa a grade for his demeanor, his behavior, his effort, I'd have to give him high marks, because he succeeded in bringing this thing through without visible public rancor. He succeeded in having a declaration which will be adopted. And let's be fair too, the thing ran well, with the exception perhaps of that errant microphone that was still on, which was probably planned, shall we say.
I really believe it was.
Well, I mean, I'm with you on this. I think the thing was, because I detected, I think, the slightest whisper of a wisp of a smile on his usually taciturn face when that happened.
And I also didn't get an oh my gosh moment, right? It was kind of like...
Well, he doesn't usually express that kind of thing.
And he hardly paused before we were able to actually cut the audio. He just kept going. It's kind of like they wanted it to be on air.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was, I don't want to use the phrase set up, but it was managed so that...
It was beautifully choreographed.
Yeah, that's I think that's where we're ending up. And the end result is, of course, that we need to make sure everybody realizes that whatever the declaration is, whatever the process is, it does not mean imminent change in the behavior of however many nations were here. It opens possibilities for change.
Before we let you go, I want to go back to the handover ceremony at Durko and the posture of the South African government rejecting the notion that the Chargé will be on stage with the president, and they say that this is a breach of protocol. But our sense is that the South Africans feel disrespected by the United States. Do you feel they're justified?
I think they feel a little bit hurt, maybe. Disrespect is a pretty strong word. I mean, the U.S. government did send the obligatory note verbal.
I mean, they've been accused of a genocide against white Afrikaners, which is a fabrication, which is a lie.
Yeah, look.
Would you feel disrespected after that?
There has been some serious bad blood between the two sides. And I always end my response to that saying that the one thing everybody needs to remember is, and I think Tula's heard this from me before, that the bilateral relationship between governments is one thing. The relationship between the two nations as a whole is very different. If you go back to a couple days ago at the B20, the Business 20, the second largest group of participants was...
American businesses.
Right. Why? Because they say, Africa, almost 1.5 billion people soon enough, most of them young, most of them craving consumer goods and high-tech things and all the stuff that people want. Yeah. This is opportunity, and we cannot avoid getting access to that opportunity. If you look at other things, the cultural exchanges between the two nations, the cultural influences, tourism, the many...
I mean, the guy sitting on our set right now.
Well, there's that too, but I mean...
And the guy talking...
Yeah, but I'm here because my wife made me stay, that's a different question.
You're welcome.
Yeah, but I mean, there are so many other parts to the relationship other than the unpleasantness between two governments.
That's fair. That's fair.
And I sometimes say we got to get some adults in the room to work this part out.
Look at you putting a positive spin on everything. I like that. I concur with that.
I believe it sincerely that,
I believe
that
you
there
too,
are
yeah.
many parts to a relationship
Absolutely.
other than the way a government official spits out spiteful or nasty or unpleasant non-truths.
And we're often one election away from a completely different foreign policy and a different
It's a
relationship,
moment.
right?
It's a moment.
Well, 3.5 years away, really.
Right. Exactly. But yeah.
Shawan,
True.
got to move on.
Okay, go.
I've got to rein you in.
Thanks, Brooks.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you for that. Brooks Spector, once again, giving us those insights and analysis in terms
Makes
of
sense.
how the relationship is playing out with the United States, but also some of what has come through South Africa's moment on the international stage and how it has been navigated.